So, hi, we've been talking about various topics surrounding cyber insurance, and such as why small and mid-sized businesses need it, how AI is changing the way insurance carriers and brokers will be servicing their customers in the future. And today we want to talk about the role that a managed IT service provider plays in helping their clients secure cyber insurance. So, with me today is Liam Holmes. He's the CEO and founder of MIS Solutions. Thank you for joining me today.
You're welcome, Carol.
If I'm a small business owner, how does an MSP help assess and enhance our current cybersecurity measures to meet the evolving standards required by cyber insurance carriers?
Yeah. So I think it's really important to understand, if you kind of go back a few years,
Mhm.
that, cyber insurance used to kind of be sold like as an add-on product, right? You'd get your professional liability and you'd get your E&O and do you want the cyber insurance policy too? And if you
Mhm.
did that, yeah, it's $250 and you could have it and off you went, right?
Mhm.
And they went down this road for a couple of years, and it didn't take long before what they realized is that these insurance companies were losing a lot of money.
Mhm.
Right, the claims for cyber insurance far exceeded
Mhm.
what they were actually collecting in revenues, and obviously that's not a great business model, right?
Right.
And so, what's happened over the last couple of years is that these insurance companies have really gotten clued up about how do we assess the risk
Mhm.
before we write a policy. And that makes a lot of sense, right?
Mhm.
Because, a company that's doing everything they can to make sure that, their cyber, readiness is in good shape and they're spending money and they're training their people,
Mhm.
those people should have a better premium than people who aren't, right? And
Mhm.
so, you know, in that new ecosystem, what's really happened is that these insurance carriers are now taking a much closer look before they write an insurance policy, right? Now,
Mhm.
they're not infallible. They make mistakes. They make a lot of mistakes.
Mhm.
And they're using these automated tools that typically without your knowledge to be able to go out and look at your domain, to
Mhm.
look at all of the IP addresses, and to begin to look at, everything that would be covered in your policy.
Mhm.
Well, one of the things that you find often is that a lot of these IP addresses and a lot of the things that they find actually aren't yours. They belong to somebody else. And so, instead of them being able to assess the risk at this big, right?
Mhm.
Because they're looking at everybody else's stuff, it turns out that you're actually overbuying insurance. And so your premiums are higher than you think that they should be. And so one of the roles that we've seen, and there's certainly several pieces to this, but one of the roles is that when a company is going in their underwriting process for
Mhm.
cyber insurance,
Mhm.
that a managed service provider can make sure that the assumptions and that the questionnaire that you have to fill out in order to get cyber insurance is filled out accurately,
Mhm. Those
right?
questionnaires have really grown too over the years. Used to be 5 simple questions and
Sure, they
Mhm.
they 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 really have. And one of the things that these insurance companies have done is not only are these questionnaires not standardized from
Mhm.
carrier to carrier, right?
Mhm.
But there's a lot of questions on these things. And one of the things that these insurance carriers are doing is that they're using these answers to these questionnaires
Mhm.
to add a warranty statement to your cyber insurance. And by that, what I mean is, if they send you a questionnaire when you're applying for insurance,
Mhm.
and let's just say it's a 45 question, questionnaire, and the answer to most of these questions is check yes or no,
Mhm.
right? And then 6 months into this thing, something happens. Well, the first thing that the insurance company does when you call them to file a claim is they're going to pull up that questionnaire and they're going to say, well, let's see how you answered those 40
Mhm.
questions, right? And you told us that you were doing this. And you told us that you had this process. And you told us that you had these products and services.
Mhm.
And so, based on all of these things that you sent to us before we wrote the policy, you shouldn't be having this problem today.
Mm-hmm.
And so before we do anything, we want to audit to see how this could have happened,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so they're using these questionnaires actually in the claims process as well. And so it's, making sure that you're answering those questions correctly,
Mm-hmm.
is really important. You don't want to fudge any of those things, right? And making sure that you have clarity in the event that, the answer to a question is it yes or no.
Mm-hmm.
You might need to add, some clarity around the answer to that question. And I think that, one of the things that a managed service provider can really help you do is to really understand, is the answer to that question yes? Is it no? Or are there some exceptions that you need to call out so that in the event that somebody brings this up when you try to file a claim,
Mm-hmm.
that you really have, that clarity on what, when, where, and why this may have happened.
Okay. All right. So, how does an MSP prepare a company's network infrastructure and security protocols to increase their eligibility for favorable cyber insurance terms?
Yeah. So it's like anything. In our industry, we kind of call it configuration management.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality of it is, if you think about any network over the course of a year, lots of things change. And as hard as you try to document everything and make sure that decisions are made, in real time as you make those decisions,
Mm-hmm.
the truth of the matter is things happen. New products, new patches come out that may expose you in ways that you didn't know. And so, as a best practice, you want to know when your cyber insurance is going to be up for renewal.
Mm-hmm.
And you probably want to start about 60 days prior to that. And you want to run both a penetration test as well as a vulnerability assessment on your network. Pretend you're the insurance company, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want to assess your own risk. And then you want to be able to fix any and all of those things that you found.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those things you may find are things that you can't fix. And you want to go ahead and think about, what your response is going to be when a insurance company comes and says to you, hey, we see that you have X on your network. And because of that, we are going to do Y with your premium, right?
Mm-hmm.
Probably a really good example of that is, a manufacturing company that maybe one of their pieces of equipment has Windows 10
Mm-hmm.
that's part of that equipment, and it can't be upgraded because it's part of that machine,
Uh-huh.
right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to want to know that, and you're going to also want to think thoughtfully through what options do you have to quarantine that off so that when you're asked, do you have any out of date operating systems on your network, that you can specifically call that out
Mm-hmm.
and be able to say, yes, we do, but here's what we've done about it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's probably a great example of, you know, why you wouldn't want to check yes or no. You would want to explain, why that is the way it is and what they could expect to find.
Mhm. And I can imagine, like in an example like that, your average business owner is not going to have clue about that. They're going to need to depend on their managed service provider
Right.
to provide them with, um, you know, solutions.
Right. And that's really the expertise that I think that provider brings to you,
Mm-hmm.
is to look at that penetration test. And that penetration test is, from the internet into the network, what things could that customer potentially be exposed to?
Mm-hmm.
That's a penetration test. Whereas a vulnerability assessment is on the inside of the network.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that customer could be exposed to? And so you want to check both of those things. And then once you have that list, you're going to want to categorize them like low, medium, and high,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then from that, you want to have an action plan to be able to mitigate some of those things, or be able to create some talking points around why it is that you have what you have. And you're going to want to be transparent with the insurance company as you apply for cyber insurance so that they know that you know and that you've done your due diligence and that you are taking care of making sure that accidents don't happen.
Right. Okay. Are there any specific documentation or audit trails that an MSP maintains that can support a strong cyber insurance application or claim process?
There's quite a number of things, right? Um, sometimes what happens when you have something happen on your network is there's a point in time right in the beginning where you're not sure what happened, right?
Hmm.
Something happened, but you don't know, was it an employee? Was it just a system glitch? Maybe where you were attacked. Um, and questions start to, swirl as to who, what, when, and where.
Hmm.
And really having good documentation, having an incident response plan, understanding, what kinds of insurance you have,
Hmm.
making sure that you are training your people to these processes, right? All of these things are really helpful, not only in preventing it from happening in the first place, but typically when you file a claim, your insurance carrier is going to start asking you all of these kinds of questions, and you're going to want to make sure that that managed service provider is working with you through that claim so that you answer these questions correctly and that you're not exposing yourself to more risk than what maybe you actually have,
Hmm.
right? And so all of these sort of documents and processes around, you know, should you call it a breach or is it an incident, right? Do you have a documented process? Can you show where we've trained our people?
Hmm.
Do you have, various controls, whether they are technical controls, which tend to be, all of the things you think about in technology,
Hmm.
or is it an administrative control, like it's a policy or procedure that's written by a company? Do you have all of these things in place? And can you show an insurance company that you are doing your part, to prevent something from
Hmm.
from happening, right?
Hmm.
Knowing that in reality, things happen to everybody,
Right.
right? And so, it's not that you are never going to be hacked. That's an unrealistic expectation, but to at least be able to show that you've done your part, you have created processes, you have trained your people, you have bought the technology, that you are doing your part to prevent something like this from happening.
Hmm. So, Liam, in the event of a cyber breach, how does an MSP act as a liaison between my company and the insurance provider to facilitate a smooth claims process?
Yeah. So, when something happens, it's one of these things where emotions run high really quickly, right? Because none of us like to have our systems down, our reputations tarnished potentially, um, our ability to service our customers possibly impacted. None of these things are really good for anybody, right? But when you file that claim, you are oftentimes going to find yourself in a conference call with 6 or 7 or 8 people. There's going to be attorneys involved. There's going to be people who have, very deep technical expertise
Mhm.
involved. And all of a sudden, you are going to feel quite overwhelmed and undermatched, right?
Intimidated, I would assume. Yeah.
Intimidated, right? And
Mhm.
so you're going to want to have somebody who can speak on your behalf as to exactly what did or didn't happen. In many of the cases that I've been involved with, typically there is somebody technical that wants to collect a lot of data. They're going to want a lot of log files that come off of all of the computers, um, the firewall, the wireless access points. They're going to want to look at your policies and procedures. They're going to want to understand, what impact it has. And one of the things that's really important to recognize is that as you're going through this process, um, that company is not particularly interested in how to get you back up and running in business. They're really interested in servicing the claim that you're filing with them, right? And one of the things that can actually happen, and happens more often than not, is the company is trying to get themselves back in business. They start restoring systems. They're starting to restore services so that they can service their customers. And inadvertently, in that process, they're overwriting data and logs that the insurance company needs in order to be able to service that claim. And when they do that, sometimes the claim actually gets denied because they don't have access to the logs and things that they need to be able to service that claim. And so getting advice as to, not only gathering this information, but, understanding how to navigate that. A good managed service provider can really help you with that. And, in some cases, particularly if you have legal obligations, you might want to bring in what's called a breach coach, right? And a breach coach is somebody that you can bring in and you can ask them, about your obligations, about, things that, you should have or should not have done, or things that you want to be able to kind of discuss legally offline before you have these conversations with your insurance company, right? And, a breach coach can be really a very useful or instrumental person in this process because, any conversation that you have with that breach coach is protected under a client attorney privilege. And so you can ask all of these questions without, worry of opening yourself up to further liability, or worrying about maybe saying the wrong thing and potentially having your claim denied, particularly if it's a really large claim.
This all plays into having an incident response plan and a dedicated incident response team already in place before the bad thing happens.
It really does, right? And this is a highly emotionally charged event, as you would imagine, right? Because it is you have people's livelihood on the line here, and people don't oftentimes think clearly
Mhm.
through how do they get their business back up and running, and how do they take care of their clients while trying to balance how do they service their financial obligations and insurance obligations as they navigate this process. And to your point, having a pre-written incident response plan, an incident response manager,
Mhm.
potentially a breach coach, right? That you've already screened and identified, somebody who could help you navigate something that is, going to be really stressful, and it's going to, um, potentially be a defining moment for your company.
Does the MSP play any sort of role in helping their clients get that incident response plan and team in place prior?
They absolutely do, right? In fact, I would say to you that typically a managed service provider is the primary driver of that incident response plan, right? They are your technology experts, right? And so they know things that you don't, and so you're going to want to work with them because there really is a couple of sides to an incident response plan, right? There's the technology side, which is important, but there's also the people and process side. And so, you know, as a managed service provider, we know a lot about your technology, but we may not know a lot about your products and services, right? And so you're going to want to think your way all the way through as best you can, who's going to be in charge of what, right? And I'll give you maybe two really simple examples, right? When something happens, who's going to be in charge of telling your customer service people what to say when clients call? You're going to want to think your way through that because, in the absence of somebody telling them what to say, they're going to say all kinds of things, and they're probably not going to say things that you want them to say,
Probably going to get you in
right?
trouble.
Probably going to
Hot
get you in
water.
trouble. What do you do if this becomes a media event and Fox News shows up, at your front door? Who's going to handle that, right? And so you're going to want to think your way through some of these things that may not have anything to do with technology, but certainly could have a huge impact on your business.
Certainly not the time to try to wing it.
No, not the time to wing it.
So, what role can an MSP play in continuously monitoring and updating the cyber defenses to maintain compliance and cyber insurance requirements?
Yeah. So, you know, we all see, with applications, with Windows, how many updates are coming out on a near daily basis. Like it happens all the time, right? And so, companies that are not paying attention to, updates to their applications or updates to their accounting systems or updates to, their Microsoft Windows or whatever it is that they're using, the longer this goes on, the more potential they have for actually having a vulnerability, become realized and actually becoming an attack, right? And I think the other thing too that's important to recognize too is that, you know, they're not all technical things,
Mm.
right?
That you talked previously about the administrative controls and
Yes.
policies and
Yeah. So when we think of a vulnerability or we think about of a hacking attempt, this is somebody forcing their way into your network in some unexpected way by taking advantage of a flaw in technology, right? From an insurance perspective, though, they see that very differently from a social engineering attack where somebody is convincing you to take an action, right? Whether that is they're calling you on the phone or they're sending you an email, but however it is that they're doing it, they are convincing you that they are somebody else, that they are asking you to do a just action on their behalf, right? From an insurance perspective, that's not a cyber insurance claim, that's a social engineering claim. And so one of the things that you're going to want to talk to your insurance broker about is all of the different kinds of cyber policies, and do you have everything that you need based on the kind of business that you run, right? And so you kind of look at these different policies and you kind of are training around these different things. And we all think about the tech, we all think about hackers going to come in and steal my stuff, right? But in reality, while that may happen, and there's certainly things that a managed service provider can do to help prevent those things from happening, recognize that that's only part of the story. The rest of it is really just about, these emails that people get with business email compromise. It's about invoice fraud. It's about people calling you on the phone, pretending to be people they aren't, right? It's really broader than just a technology issue.
those pesky humans.
It is.
They keep wanting to give your money away
They do.
to the criminals. So-
And you would be amazed at how successful they are at getting people to do these things.
Mhm. It is because they're tricky.
They're tricky.
They're very tricky. All right. So, how does an MSP stay informed about changes in cybersecurity policies, and how can they proactively adjust the security measures accordingly?
Yeah. So this is really talking about a security program, right?
Mhm.
Security is not a one and done, set it, forget it, we do it once a year kind of a thing, right? Because we just talked about a minute ago about how all of these updates are always happening with applications, with firewalls, with rules and regulations, right? Different compliance standards, whether we're talking about PCI for credit cards or we're talking about healthcare or financial services, all of these rules and regulations are constantly changing. And so you have to make sure that, your managed service provider has the technical expertise to know when a rule changes and could potentially hold you in breach maybe of a contract, right? Say, for example, you were CMMC compliant, which is companies who are doing business with the Department of Defense, providing products and services, right? That organization just went through a fairly major change in some of the rules and regulations. And so, if you're a company that is providing products and services into that space, into that government space, then all of a sudden you may have a new set of requirements that you may not have known even existed. But you are going to be held accountable in the event that something happens, or in the event that you actually go through an audit, right? You are going to be financially responsible for that.
Mhm. All right, so I just have one more question here. Can you provide any examples or case studies where an MSP, MIS Solutions maybe even, has successfully supported a client securing or renewing cyber insurance through targeted security enhancements?
Sure.
I bet we have a lot of them,
And
right?
we actually this is a really common thing. So, you know, we probably fill out, gosh, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of these
Mhm.
questionnaires a month for our clients, where we are helping them understand the context of the question. Do they have something? Do they not have something? And one of the things that we do at MIS is we track the renewal dates
Mm.
of these cyber insurance policies for our clients. And when we see that they're coming up for renewal, again, about 60 days prior to renewal, we are looking at their technology stack, their solution stack. We are looking through all of the questions that other insurance companies are asking, and we're pushing those against, how that particular company is configured. And we're having conversations with clients about, do you have one of these? Do you have one of those? We need to do a penetration test. We need to do a vulnerability assessment. We need to get you well positioned because in 60 days, you're going to have to go through underwriting, right? And so this is actually a well-worn path for us in terms of making sure that our customers are very well positioned when they're going through a cyber insurance renewal, right? And I guess a subcomponent of that too is we are starting to ask questions about what kinds of insurance do you have, and it's really important that I say and that we recognize MIS Solutions is not an insurance company. We're not a broker. We don't sell insurance, right? But we do play in the space of making sure that our clients are well protected. And so if we see something or we think that you potentially could be underinsured, we're going to encourage you to have these conversations with your broker, and if we need to get involved and help you articulate those conversations, we can do that from time to time. Or sometimes we have customers who come to us and will say to us, uh, this is something that we've been meaning to do, or this is a conversation that we've been meaning to have, but we may not necessarily know who to have this conversation with, or our current insurance carrier doesn't offer these products and services. Could you refer us to somebody? And we will make a referral, right? And sometimes, it might be an insurance company to be able to buy these products and services, or sometimes, like we've done in the past, um, people might be thinking their way through an incident response plan, and they might be thinking their way through, gee, I wish we had a breach coach that we knew that we could call. MIS, do you have somebody that could service us? Maybe even a conversation that we could have preemptively about, what to expect and what their role would be and how they bill, and, would it be covered and what kind of insurance do we have? And, really just being proactive around, understanding how would we react and what should we expect, not only in the event that something happens, but also in the event that we go through our annual renewal for our cyber insurance, right? And I think that this is a really important thing that a lot of people are overlooking.
Mhm. Well, Liam, thank you. That's a lot of information to digest.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate it. And if you are wondering how MIS Solutions can help your company, um, please be sure to reach out to us. Thank you very much, Liam.
You're welcome.